Hi, Bella Adamova. It's great to be talking to you. We're both in Prague, I believe. Could you just introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right. So I am a freelance classical singer, is what I would call myself. I'm a soprano and also an improviser. I actually know each other because Jeremy teaches in the school where I used to go to, and he was helping me with a TED talk that I was doing about improvising a few years ago. And so yes, I went to school in Prague, which is where I grew up, but I come from Chechnya. And then after school, I went to London, to Germany, to Switzerland to study. And I studied classical singing mostly. And then I did a master's in free improvisation in Basel at the Music Academy there with
Right.
fantastic teachers. But I started improvising when I was in the school in Cologne, really, with
Okay.
Michael Gates, who is my
Okay. Let's go right back to the beginning. So, your musical background and your earliest musical experiences, your training, what was school like, and so on.
well, so I always sang, which is probably quite a cliche, maybe story for most singers. There's so many videos of me walking around and just making up my own songs actually as a child, 4 or 5 years old. And then I started in choirs. They weren't really classical choirs. I first started in my Czech school, and then I went to a British school where we had fantastic choir leaders. Maybe you know them, Sharka and Brendan Coleman.
Yeah.
And so there we did mostly kind of soul music, some jazz, world music, that sort of thing, some musical. And that was, I think, really important for me to my ear training because we didn't do the music from scores mostly. Mostly we did it by ear. We had to remember off by heart. We were taught and then we had to do that. And I got to sing a few solos there. But actually, the first solo I ever sang was we had a musical at school. Weber's Joseph and Technicolor Dreamcoat. I don't know what that's called exactly. And my class teacher noticed me then and she gave me the part of the prologue. So that was where I started singing properly, I think. Um, yeah, but then I started taking singing lessons when I was 12. I started playing flute when I was 6, and I always played some instrument, and I started playing piano when I was 14. But I got singing lessons from an opera singer, Pavla Zumrova, and poor thing, I always made her teach me Mariah Carey and Alicia Keys songs, and she always wanted me to do some opera, and I really didn't like it at first. I always wanted to be a jazz singer and a soul singer. Uh, but also because of my background, I come from a more conservative background. That wasn't really an option for me. And then I started looking more into classical singing, which also was not really highly celebrated by some family members. Some were very supportive, some weren't exactly. And I fell in love with classical music when I don't know, maybe the first piece that I really got into was The Rite of Spring from Stravinsky. Your predecessor at the ISB, Tony Ackerman, who was a fantastic musical teacher. I'm just so lucky to have gotten to learn music with him. He taught us about so much different music, and I don't know, he was able to always just show it to us in a way that was accessible, that was exciting, and that really got to the core of things. So anyway, so after that, I went to study for my bachelor's degree in London at Trinity Laban, which was an interesting experience. Some people might say it's the worst music college in London. It gets looked down upon a little bit by the other more elite institutions like the Royal College, Royal Academy, Guildhall. Very often you don't even get an audition for some things if you go to Trinity, whilst if you went to the other schools, you might. Um, but I think the school was quite aware of this status, oh, so it showed us ways to more alternative things that weren't always the typical road for a classical singer, or like the soloist, big soloist pathway. And there for my second year there, they started doing this thing that's called collaboration laboratory, I think it's called. They do 2 weeks in the middle of the year every year when they make everybody in the school, so that means dancers and musicians across all of the genres, and everybody has to be in some sort of a collaborative project for a week. And you get to choose. There's a huge Excel sheet at the beginning of the year where you say your picks, and then you get allocated, and then you're just stuck with it. So that was really interesting. And they always told us, "Oh, you're probably not going to make it, so look for alternative ways to do things." And actually, the head of the department there for the singers was an improviser as well, Dr. Linda Hurst. And in our first introduction to the school, everybody comes to this assembly, And her and the pianist Douglas Finch, they would always improvise something. I guess they did this because then nobody has to like rehearse anything, sort of thing. So they took the two improvisers and made them do something for the students. Um, and I took like an improvisation lesson from her once because we had an improvisation competition at Trinity, and that was open across genres. And I remember one year I went there only with this one lesson and having never done it before, but I just kind of knew and thought I would like to do it and I want to do it, so I just did it. And I got commended actually from the jurors, but I know for a fact that I kind of got scared at one point and I just left the stage without really concluding the piece properly. I must have been like 20 at that point.
Mhm.
Sorry, I don't remember what the question was anymore.
So all about your musical background. And so you're starting to experience improvisation and starting to meet people who are more experienced.
Yes. But unfortunately, I don't know, for whatever reason, Dr. Linda Hurst did not take me on in that. And then I moved to Germany to do my master's there in Cologne. And I had a friend who I knew from before from there, and she told me about Michael Gees and the fact that he teaches improvisation at the school. I signed up for lessons with him. I don't remember this. Apparently, we set up a date for my first lesson, and I never showed up. But I mean, I don't remember this at all. I think I remember being very excited to start learning with him, and then I just never got around to having the lesson. And then in Germany, you get what is called Sprecherziehung, which is where they teach you to speak properly. And my teacher for speaking, she led this workshop with Michael for the first time that year, and she invited me to come along to that. And then I finally met Michael, I think December 2014. And ever since then, we've been working together, and that's been what really led me to improvising.
So what was it like studying classical singing, like, performing repertoire at college? Did you really enjoy it, or was it stressful or hard work? Or
well, I did not shine in London, let's just put it that way. I came from Prague, where I was like a big fish in a little pond. I was like very self-confident when I went there, and then my confidence just got crushed, I think, in our first performance class. And the singing was difficult. I had a very strict teacher who was very adept, I think, at teaching technically, but I don't know if she really had much patience for me anymore. And I'm quite stubborn, so I think I wasn't the most malleable of students, especially then. I think I've learned to find my approaches to shut down my ego sometimes, just to listen and to take some advice. I've become better at that, but it took me a while. And yeah, so in London, things were not going very well. And that's also why I didn't stay there and did do a master's there. And then I had a lot of performance anxiety. I was very unsure. I loved classical music. This is my bachelor years, is when I listened, I think, to so much music. I would spend hours and hours just taking out library books and listening, for example, I don't know, to the full Prokofiev song. What do you call it?
cycle?
Song collection, not just the full thing. Or I've heard all of the Rimsky-Korsakov songs just because, I just love it. And I fell in love with the art song. And opera never really my number one favorite thing, but when I lived in London, I used to go to recitals, I don't know, maybe once a month, to Wigmore Hall, to Barbican, everything. It was just such a luxury as a young student to live in London because there was so much access to so much music, and especially chamber music, which I was surprised afterwards, after leaving London, how uncommon that it actually is in other big cities to really have a dedicated venue to chamber music, for example, like the Wigmore Hall.
Mm.
And so I loved classical music, but it really was not working out. But I decided to continue pursuing it. I had a wonderful teacher, my second teacher in London, Linton Atkinson. He really taught me a lot about musicality, and he put a lot of faith into me. So I did have like someone cheering me on, but it wasn't working from a lot of other sides, and it just wasn't working technically. I wasn't enjoying it. So then I moved to Cologne. I was probably the youngest one in my master's degree at the time. I think I was 22. And in Germany, it's much more common to start studying later, especially if you're a singer, and especially with a lower voice like mine. So I don't know if I could really take such good advantage of the master's degree there, in a sense.
Sorry, the master's was in improvisation?
No, it was in classical singing.
Classical.
My first master's was in classical singing in Germany, in Cologne. But Germany was amazing because there are so many resources. the school, you barely pay anything for it, and if you take it, all the stuff is there. You
Mm.
get one-on-one acting lessons once a week. You can do the improvising. You get song lessons, opera lessons, singing lessons. There's just so many projects. My school was really great because we had 2 or 3 opera productions a year. There was just so much to do. Contemporary music, early music, everything, anything you wanted really. And so there I continued working on the singing, but it wasn't until I really started improvising my singing got better, I guess. Because I don't think it's very good for a singer to feel worthless. That if you're feeling that constantly, you're kind of. I used to go to my singing lessons telling myself, okay, just don't cry today. And so it was good to find something that I was good at and that I was really enjoying, and that was still the singing that was coming a bit more naturally. So I guess that's that. And then I ended up moving to Basel to study improvising, and I thought I was going to give up the singing classically. A little bit, I thought so. Not fully, but.
What can you say? What was difficult about classical singing for you, or what didn't click?
The technical aspects of it. I was always told, "Oh, you're so musical," which is in a way actually kind of like a backhanded compliment. And I was always told I have this potential. Oh, and be patient. You're still so young, which I understand now, and I wish I could really just listen to those people when I was younger. Yeah, and I think it's just sometimes it's just about finding the right teacher for you, and that takes time. And it's not just right in their approach of teaching you, but it's also not in just what they teach you, but also how they teach you, because it's so personal. I think unfortunately, or I don't know if fortunately, the singing is a lot about the psyche. It's because we are the instrument, it's very deeply connected to each other. And I think therapy helped me a lot as well. I started going to therapy when I was in Cologne.
Do you remember one experience as an improviser quite early on that surprised you, that seemed to open up new horizons for you?
I remember I don't know, I was maybe this is a little personal, but I was having like a faith crisis at the time when I moved to Cologne. And the improvising for me was like the last thread that told me, this is not for me. Someone else is doing this. Like it sounds probably very spiritual, but it's just, I don't know. I just didn't know where it was coming from, you know? You get into a state of flow, probably. I don't know what a meditative state, probably some people would call it. If you're, yeah. And ideas just come out. I don't know. It just works.
Right. I'm
not a very technical improviser. If you ask me which interval I just sang, I probably usually have no clue. I don't know. But because for me, improvising is usually about storytelling. That's why I don't love improvising so much without text. I either like improvising it or I like working with pre-written poems by me or by others. Because I think for me, it's about storytelling.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit about the duo that you've been involved in for a few years now?
So with Michael, Michael is actually a classical pianist too. He was a child prodigy. And he has a very special approach to classical music. So when I went to have my first lesson with him, he, as he said to me afterwards, he saw something in me, and he really helped foster that. We had, this is such a luxury. This doesn't really happen like once you're a professional, you're not in school anymore. It's very hard to get this kind of luxury, but we would meet, I don't know, maybe once a week, usually one every 2 weeks at least, to improvise together. So we had a really strong foundation of getting to know each other. At first, him like teaching me more. He would do exercises with me to really get me to focus. Because people used to call me a lot like a wild horse. Like somebody needs to just sit me down and be like, okay, just focus a little bit. Let's just do some technical work. Of where he would probably sometimes just play a chord, and then I had to eventually get to a tone that would provoke him to play a different chord. Or we would talk about structures, about like, okay, let's try to do something in the sonata form. Or he would force me to stick with an idea. I think that's a really hard one for improvisers to grasp. Like, it's not boring if you keep sticking at it. And what's really interesting is eventually the next idea will find you. You just have to keep exploring the one that you're at.
Mm.
And oftentimes I think it's good to stick with an idea longer than you want to, because what to us seems like an eternity, the perception of time is very different, right? When between when you're in it and when you're watching it from outside.
Mm.
It's yeah.
Could you say something about language? You know, as a singer, sometimes some free improvisation as a singer will be without words, and just, if I say just, will be sounds. So how do you sing? I didn't catch what you said earlier, but you sing with words, or you sing without words?
I usually sing with words, because to me it just seems unnatural to use your voice and not use words. For me, they're just go together. I don't even love singing vocalese pieces that are written for the voice that don't have text.
So do you improvise with words, or do you sing from a text that's pre-written?
Both, but more pre-written, I would say, than. Well, it depends. So with Michael, I would categorize what we do more as spontaneous composition, and what I studied in Basel would be much more free improvisation. And when you do free improvisation, I think it can be much more grotesque. And as you mentioned before, actually in theater, that there's a lot of humor tied to theater improvisation. I would say for me, and free improvisation, it has a lot to do with humor as well, because if you're looking for something new, I think the easiest way, in a sense, to find something new is to find something ridiculous. But I still, even if I don't use text, then I usually improvise gibberish that kind of sounds like text, or I play some sort of a character. I think for me, sometimes I almost think of myself more as an actress, or I think of it as more of some sort of theater when I improvise than maybe most of my instrumentalist colleagues would do. I think it's a very different beast, actually, being a singer improviser and an instrumentalist improviser, I think. Also, very much specifically, even technically speaking, I have to imagine every single tone before I make it, because my brain has to send a signal to my muscles to make that noise. It's very difficult, or actually maybe impossible, for me to do something actually random. Whilst if you have a guitar in front of you and you have a bunch of tools, you can just drop something on the guitar. You don't know what it's going to sound like. So you have much more opportunities to be surprised by your instrument and to be inspired by it. Because I was in a class of improvisers in Basel, and we were all mixed. There were people coming from jazz, from classical. I had a guitarist in my class who came from punk rock, for example, as well. Crazy, amazing, talented dude. And we had two singers in the class as well. And it's just different. It's very different to be a singer improviser, in my opinion, and to be an instrumentalist improviser.
As you were working with your pianist, how did the relationship change between teacher and student, and how did it become a performing duo in its own right?
Well, quite early on, Michael asked me to do a concert with him. First, it was at the school. They had this thing called the piano night, and their theme was Russian that year. And so we made this little program of Russian poets and improvising to them, to their poetry. And then on the month after that, I had my first gig with him outside of school. He has this concert series in the theater that he founded in Gartenkirchen. Once a month, he invites somebody to improvise with him. And he has a trained audience by now. Like, those people know how to listen to improvisers. It's very, very special. And there you just do a 1 hour of no plan, and you improvise.
Could you say what you mean by a trained audience? This is an interesting idea.
Well, I mean, it's an audience that's used to going into the meditative state with you and really focusing and being in it with you. It's not an audience that comes there and says, well, show me what you've got. It's an audience that's there and that's listening, that's leaning in, you know? And that's such a gift for any performer, I think. Because it's mostly locals, and I think he leads workshops with a lot of those people who also, at an amateur level, improvise with him. So that's
What would you say to somebody who says that, to step out on stage and not have a clue what you're going to do? I mean, I think a lot of people would say this is absolutely terrifying, and they need the piece and they need the score and they need to know what they're supposed to do first. How is that not terrifying? And how might it be exciting?
First of all, it is a little terrifying. I think it gets less terrifying with how inspired you're feeling that day, for example, for me. But also, it's not like we don't practice. we actually probably have to practice more than the classical musicians would take a score, because we have to know each other and we have to be in tune with each other. We have to listen to each other. It's you and I, we didn't plan this conversation, for example, right now, and we're able to keep going for I don't know how long now, and I think I still have things to say. But a person who might not, I don't know, perhaps in the past when I didn't feel so confident, I might not feel so comfortable speaking to you so freely without a plan. Or I don't know, when you're a child, when you don't really speak, it's harder for you to talk for longer and be competent. I think of it as language, actually, kind of. It's like a conversation. You're in constant conversation with each other. I guess it's versus, I don't know, I guess when you're playing from a score, it's like you have a script, and we just don't have a script when we go on stage.
So when you start, does one of you always start first, or is it 50-50, or how long might it take for the first person to make a sound?
It depends. I don't think we ever start instantaneously together to just see what happens. Maybe once or twice. Sometimes we say, okay, you start today. In the past, it was much more likely that Michael would start the piece. I mean, actually, probably 90% of the time. Now it's more like 70-30. Still more him than me.
And you said that you haven't worked together for 6 months for obvious reasons. When you start rehearsing together again, what happens? How do you rehearse? How do you play together?
Well, it depends. Very often, Michael has this sort of idea of like, oh, we need to work on this, or I think, oh, we need to work on this.
What is this? Do you mean a text or a technique?
It's more of a. I think we think about it more in terms of compositions, I guess. As in, okay, we're not quite together very often, tempo-wise, or like in rhythm sometimes. Or recently, well, last night at my story, for example, let's say, you weren't listening to me so well. So what can we do about that? So we focus on that, for example. But if we haven't seen each other for 6 months, we start off just doing something together. Just, I have a lot of text already in my head, so sometimes I make stuff up. So it also depends on what I feel like.
And did different languages trigger different kinds of music in you?
Yes, I think so. It has also to do with the fact, for example, I know if I'm improvising in Czech, most probably nobody understands me. So I tend to say a bit more ridiculous things in Czech sometimes. And I feel much more vulnerable when I improvise in English, because I know that everybody understands everything. But that's also the language I usually write in. So.
And have you improvised in German?
Yeah, also.
But what about the sound of the language? Does the sound of German, like forgetting the words and the meaning that people might understand, what about the sound of the language?
Yes, of course. It's every language has its own aesthetic feel, I guess, in a sense. It has its German. German gets a really bad rap. Actually, I think German sounds very beautiful when it's sung, but it's different. There's a little more I don't know sound. I think it's more angular almost. Then, for example, English is very soft. You don't get any rolled R's. You don't get, even your T's aren't hard. They're like they almost sound like a cymbal. It's Czech to me sounds brighter. Just because it has to do, I think, with the sound of the vowels. Also in Czech, they're pretty bright, a lot of them.
Right.
I think of it in terms of colors. Maybe, yeah, you're right. They're different. I don't know. They sound different. just like when spoken.
One question I've loved asking everybody that I've talked to so far is about recording your improvisations and what it's like to listen back to an improvisation. And the main question is, when you like something that you hear, what is it that you like when you listen back to yourself improvising?
I think I get the most excited about it when it sounds fresh. Sounds like something maybe I don't do so often. And when it sounds vulnerable. For me, like vulnerability is everything. I don't know. That's for me is key. When it sounds genuine, when it sounds like I'm really getting something across. Or where I feel like I can recreate the feeling I had when I sang this. I feel what I felt when I sang this. Or what's really also cool, I love it when I listen to a recording and I didn't realize that my inspiration came from Michael, but I only realized, or vice versa.
Right.
When you really realize who influenced whom to do what.
Right.
Sometimes you think, oh, that was my idea. And then you're like, no, it wasn't. He gave you that and you took it.
Right.
It's interesting recording because we recorded that album. It will be 3 years soon now. And that's all improvised. We had for some songs, we have like a structural plan. So I don't know how much some people would argue that those are not truly improvisations anymore. Also, as soon as you start working with text, it's not free improvisation anymore, for sure. You already have some sort of a structure that you're working around, right? And so it's a composition with elements of improvisation, some might even say. But we don't ever have some sort of a harmonic scheme out or anything like that.
You said something just now about listening to yourself improvising and when you hear yourself doing something fresh. Could you say something about the techniques or, jazz musicians often talk about licks and jazz musicians practice vocabulary. And of course, they might hope that they never actually play that vocabulary exactly in a performance. But what are your licks as an improvising singer?
Too many, and I hate that. It makes me so angry every time. I'm like, can't you make up anything new? Why do you keep doing the same thing over and over again? I know for a fact I use certain intervals a lot. Probably, I'm sure. Or I have my way of, if I'm bored of staying in the same harmonic space where we are, of how to provoke Michael to move somewhere else. There are a lot of them actually, and you don't even realize until you start listening to yourself. That's why I find recording so useful actually, because you can be your own teacher a little bit as well. You start editing yourself and you start realizing what your automatisms are. I think that's what it is. I think when I realize I'm not running on autopilot, or that I'm, really creating something new in the moment, that's the most exciting. What's the recorded things. But for example, if I'm free improvising, I know sometimes I like to do my crazy lady, which is when I start doing all this coloratura and all those runs back and forth. I don't know. And they just get, because the thing is, they also get into your musculature, right? So they're ready at your fingertips. So when you're doing a performance, you like to go for the thing that is sure. It's hard to go for the thing that technically might not work out.
Right.
But I also decided not to be so hard on myself and tell myself, well, Britain also sounds like Britain and Shostakovich sounds like Shostakovich, because they also use the same things over and over again. So it's okay if my improvisations sound the same. I don't have the luxury of sitting there and editing my stuff so it doesn't sound the same, because it happens in the moment.
Do you have a favorite improvisation that you've done that you think this is one of my best recordings?
Yeah, I have some favorites. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I will link these at the end, or find a way for people to, because I'm really interested always that, professional improvisers have a whole body of work that the public often thinks is just amazing. But the players themselves have got their own secret view on their own work. And a lot of it might be, this is pretty good, this is what I do. But that moment was incredible. And I
Yeah.
think it'd be so interesting for listeners to get a sense of, well, what is Bella aiming for? What does she enjoy?
Well, a lot of those things are also in my personal archive recorded on my iPhone, so no one will ever get to hear them. uh, there's also a whole archive of things of when my actual singing wasn't very good, so no one will ever get to hear those. But musically, they were interesting, and sometimes I'm like, why can't we just transcribe those and record them?
Mm.
But it wouldn't be the same anymore.
You talked earlier about self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
You want to just enlarge a little bit about that on that? Maybe, I don't know, if mental health or self-esteem and how that has been connected to your voice and your singing.
Well, interestingly enough, I came up on this post on Instagram a couple of days where I've heard somebody talk about trauma and its actual physical effects on the voice, which was really, really enlightening, because I've instinctively thought that might be something that happens. But I've never heard somebody say, oh, this kind of trauma leads to this sort of like dysphonia, or this sort of, how would you say it? Improper working of the vocal system, actually. So it's been interesting to me. I started going to therapy when I was still studying Cologne because of some past childhood trauma that really needed taking care of. And I actually went for the first time because I was doing this masterclass with Professor Kelly. And she told me this one thing that really stuck with me. And she said, Bella, stop trying to make yourself small. There's nothing small about you. And as singers, we get mocked often also for being too much by other instrumentalists, but also just as maybe it's also a female thing that you, especially if you come from a more conservative background, when you're told not to be too seen, not to be too heard. And if you, for example, for me, I just couldn't help it. I was always loud. And I wasn't noticeable, but I was taught by my life situations that being loud wasn't very safe for me, I guess, in a sense. And expressing myself wasn't safe for me. So how can you expect me to feel comfortable on stage and allow my voice to be free on stage when I don't feel like I can, that's safe for me?
Mm.
When my I don't know, my mental system, or I don't know how you call it properly, has been taught that it's not safe to be free, to be yourself. So those are really things that really have to get untangled, I think, in order for you to feel comfortable in your own skin. I did not feel comfortable in my own skin at all. I always would try to hide. I grew up being an overweight child, so so you always think that you're too big and you have to be smaller. That's how I felt. And I always had a big voice. I was always heard. I would always get into trouble when everybody else would speak in class, and I would be the one who would get left for detention because I was the one who was heard. Those kind of little things, you don't even realize how they can affect people in the future. So improvising, it was a space where there were no expectations of how I had to sound. Because in classical music, there are so many expectations of how perfection sounds. And no two people actually will agree. So one person will tell you you're doing this wrong, and the other person will tell you the exact opposite. And when you're a student and you don't know who you are and what you are good at yet, and what your thing is that you can be proud of, and you don't have any self-esteem, you're just constantly trying to fit in and make somebody like you.
Mm.
That's no way to live, and you feel tight. You don't feel free. And as a singer, you need to feel free. You have to take the space and own it. So the improvising really helped in that, because I had somebody, also Michael was great at telling me what I was good at. I felt valued, I felt seen, and I felt like I had something to say and that it was of value. And everybody has something to say that's of value. Everybody has their story to tell. I think I am sure that everybody's inner world is exciting. Some people maybe don't know what's going on in themselves. They don't even have access to themselves yet because of whatever blockages I don't know. But everyone has something interesting to say.
Mm.
And that's what improvising is about. It's about realizing, because I used to always complain to Michael, and I would say, like, I don't have anything interesting to say. I don't know. I'm really boring. I don't have any ideas. And the more you do it, the more you get like positive confirmation of the fact that you do have something to say.
Mm.
That's why recording my lessons was also really important, because I didn't necessarily always trust what others told me, but I could trust the recording. If I liked it, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I do have something to say.
Mm.
But also improvising was good because it gave me space to explore my voice. So I got to know the mechanism better as well, without the pressure of being perfect. Because I think I actually, my singing, classical singing is doing much better now. So I'm really focused on that actually right now, about, and I'm having concerts and I'm doing things. But that only happened because I was feeling, I gave myself time and space to really work on my voice without the pressure of having to get results.
So, sorry, can you just enlarge on that? So now you are returning to classical singing.
I mean, I started maybe 2-3 years ago. I got a new singing teacher when I was halfway through my degree in improvisation in Basel. And this fantastic lady. I didn't have any projects coming up. I didn't have any classical concerts, nothing. But I had this wonderful woman. Her name is Eva Nifegeld. She taught me the basics again. She has this wonderful wisdom about how to tell somebody something. For example, if she gave me a criticism, she made sure to tell me that doesn't mean that everything you do is wrong. We just need to correct this. Because so often, if you get criticized for something, you think, "Oh, I'm worthless. I don't know how to do anything," and then you're starting off with crushed self-esteem, and then you can't work. So I took my time. I took my time, and I'm constantly working on myself. Learning also how to ask for help from people also is a big one, and learning to know who to ask for help. But so things have been going much better in that sense, in that field since then.
My final question is about education, music education. Now, as you look back on all of your years in music education, what do you think could be different? How, and especially in terms of improvising and feeling free as a musician, how would you go back and change things if you could change things about music education?
Well, I recently started teaching myself, so that's a really interesting thing to be tackling, because it's difficult, I think, trying to teach kids to improvise. Also, even though I'm an improviser, I'm finding my approach to that. I have a much easier time, for example, working with adult musicians and getting them to improvise. But I think it's really important to, I think it's really important to explain to a child why they have to be taught the basics. So they don't think that it's just torture that I'm just doing so that I'm bored. So they understand that that's a tool to self-expression. That you and I think it would be great. I think it's really important for teachers when they give criticism and critique, and when they teach to explain to a child why they're doing it and what it means and how it's going to make them better. Because so often you just get a lot of negative comments and you don't know what's good about you as well. Sorry, I don't have a very good prepared answer to this, but I think it's a tough one. I think it's really also individual. Some children enjoy structure and they really enjoy learning scales. Most probably don't, but some do, and those are important. They get the dexterity into your fingers, for example, and with your voice, the sooner you can grasp really technical basics, the faster you can move on to other things that are more fun. And those things need time and patience, and they are important. I think a big cultural trend right now, to me, from what I see around, is doing things without really knowing how to do them, and just think, oh, I can just call myself an artist and I don't have the skills, but I mean it. So I have this concept. So my art is my art, and that's great, and I can do whatever. I think it's great to democratize, actually, but I also think it's really important to not forget about the skill level that is needed. And not being a musician is a real skill. It takes time. It takes years and years and years of practice, and that's true. But I just think they need to go hand in hand. I don't think it's one or the other. You have to teach a child to give the people the tools so they can do the fun things that they enjoy. I think it has to be both.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Bella, thank you very, very much. It's just been really, really interesting. I'm going to ask you in a minute for some links to performances or some videos that have never been seen before, perhaps. Maybe in fact, we could find some of your early singing recordings, and that might encourage some singers when they hear that you didn't always sound fantastic.
I really did not. Yeah, I think, but I'm not sure if I'm confident enough yet to share those with the world. Okay. Maybe in time.
All right, in time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Bella.
Thank you, Jeremy.